Welcome back to Innovation by Design, which is a podcast that explores how design thinking drives innovation across the AEC industries. I'm Evan Troxel, your host, and as always, joined by my co-host Candace Kitchen. How you doing, Candace?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Why don't you introduce our guest for this episode?
This episode, we have Jesse Balok with us. He is the Vice President of Planning, Design, and Construction of Henry Ford Health. And we're really excited to have you today. So, Jesse, if you could just start out by telling us a little bit about your story. How did you come to be at Henry Ford?
Well, it happened a little bit earlier than I thought. I spent 20 years in consulting and was working in facility planning, programming, design, activation, and was lucky enough to do projects all across the country, U.S., Canada, the Middle East, and at a certain point, I was starting to think about what my exit strategy is from that. There's a lot of travel. Wife and 3 kids at home that I got to see on the weekends, and was looking for something that, I probably never thought I would go into facility planning in healthcare. That's what I ended up in, and it's all about relationships, right? So one of my good colleagues and friends that I had worked with for 20 some years ended up as a consultant working for Henry Ford Hospital, and recognizing the need and the fact that they needed to completely redo their entire campus. And as he was transitioning to an FTE with that group, they brought me on to help run our new project, Destination Grand, which is the first phase of redevelopment of the hospital campus in Detroit. So that was about 3 years ago, and now they can't get rid of me.
No turning back.
Can you describe the scope of the organization? Talk about how big is Henry Ford Health, and what are the areas that you cover?
Yeah, it's gotten bigger. Last October, we were involved in a joint venture with Southeast Michigan Ascension Hospital. So we now are significantly larger in a lot of ways. Right now, we are a 13 hospital system across Southeast Michigan. That accounts for about 50,000 employees. So it's a significant number of employees. I think depending on which organization you ask, we're usually in the top 3 of employers in the state of Michigan. So between GM and us and Corewell Health, one of our collaborators and competitors in the market. So we have everything from ambulatory clinics, freestanding emergency departments, urgent care, ambulatory surgery centers, in addition to our 13 hospitals. So we have over 500 sites of care across Southeast Michigan.
When I think about the healthcare system, especially one as large as you just described it, which you're a piece of, right? There's obviously a state and national. There's so many different ways to think about this, but I think about it like infrastructure, right? And then I think about your role in that, the planning, the design, the evolution of Henry Ford Health, and having to maintain the current infrastructure while you're innovating and building new ways to deliver healthcare to your clients. Can you just talk about kind of what that's like in your role? Because I can imagine phasing and just the planning that goes into these projects is an enormous set of tasks and responsibilities.
It's quite a challenge, and one of those things that I probably never appreciated as a consultant coming in and working with individuals like myself in different organizations. Most of what I've done in my career is thinking about what do we need to do to change the physical environment to enable us to do the types of care and innovation that we need 10, 20, 30, 100 years down the road. But that's all happening at the same time as, we have a 1915 hospital. It's over 100 years old. There are leaks. There are challenges with infrastructure. We have to upgrade our HVAC systems. We have electrical and plumbing issues. And we have just buildings that age over time. And so on one hand, you're thinking of, what does a smart patient room look like, and how can we use voice activation and ambient listening and AI to help us prevent patients from getting out of bed and falling, or to detect duress in a certain part of the hospital. And the other side is we have, millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure requirements across our 13 hospital system, and just a small proportion of the dollars to actually satisfy that on an annual basis. And so you're really juggling two things at once, thinking very far in the future, and in some cases just trying to catch up to current day.
So just building on that, do you actually have like decommissioning plans as well as commissioning plans? It seems like with the kind of you're what I would consider like a serial builder. I'm an architect. You're one of those clients who's just always building and adding to your inventory, but also stuff does age out, right? So you have to modernize it or decommission it completely.
Yeah, and the cost to maintain some of these older buildings is astronomical. You're looking at situations where we're not at any point where our buildings are on the National Historic Register, but we do have historically significant buildings. And so you go through the process of the economic evaluation of what can we do with this building to maintain its highest and best use. So in some cases, you're scaling down from inpatient care or diagnostic care or even just ambulatory care to purely administrative functions. But then you're still left with cold offices that have leaks and things like that. And, many of our leaders and staff deserve better than that. So part of our process is, as we bring on new square footage, is to evaluate how much of the existing infrastructure we can afford to lose or have to lose in order to fund what we're doing. As we know, margins are tight. We have on our Detroit campus, we have over 3 million square feet now. We're adding 1.5 million square feet to it, and we're emptying 500,000. So we're emptying 500,000 to go into 1.5. So that's that ratio of how things change over time, that the requirement of space to provide care is much greater now than it was certainly 100 years ago, but even 20, 30 years ago. And so we have to do that reconciliation. And if you talk to our finance folks, they'll tell you one answer, and then you talk to others that maybe have a little bit more affinity and connection with the buildings and the aesthetic of that. You just don't make buildings like they used to in some cases too. Right. So we have great architecture that we'd really love to be able to keep up as much as we can.
Tell us a little bit more detail about your role in that project specifically, because I know it's going to be huge for Detroit. So what exactly do you do to help support that?
One of the benefits of me coming in when I did and having, played a similar role as I've played at organizations throughout my career is you can be a bit of a change agent. You can challenge the status quo. You can ask the whys that other people are like, well, you know why? Because we tried that 3 years ago and it didn't work. But, you can have some of that just lack of understanding, a lack of familiarity allows to ask some questions. So that's not all of it. I think there are things that if you look at healthcare specifically, it's probably similar in a lot of other industries, but you have such specialization of tasks, right? You have technicians that do this, and you have, laboratorians that do this, and you have nurses and physicians, and you have specialists and subspecialists, and it's a lot to collect together, and yet patients see it all as one thing, one experience, one broad collection of, it's not, well, that tech did this. It's, well, when I went to Henry Ford, my experience was this, right? And so I really try to bring that outside perspective, at least historically, of how is this landing on the patient? How is this landing on the visitor? What are the things that we can do differently? And folks sometimes just aren't used to thinking that way because it's a world of workarounds, right? You especially in healthcare, there's only so many things you can schedule and plan. And then you have a pandemic, or then a busload of kids shows up and they're injured, or, there's a failure in the infrastructure. And so the process of taking really smart, capable individuals from their existing environment, asking them what they do and asking them how we could make it better if all the constraints were lifted, takes some time. And, we spent a lot of time, hundreds of people from all departments, from frontline staff through executive leadership, really trying to understand what wasn't working, what was working that we wanted to keep, and what are some of those aspirational things that you don't even know if you can do yet. And that's usually where technology comes in. And so we're pretty lucky that in the last 5 years, the black box high-tech solutions that we used to talk about 10, 20 years ago are actually coming to reality with AI, and as we're talking in a virtual environment, we do virtual visits now from our physicians. So there's a lot of things that we actually can do that in years past were a little bit of a hedging towards whatever that potential reality was. So my job mostly is to say, this is what I think is possible. Here are the things that we all need to gather around. And, the first 2 or 3 years were really that, working with pulling together a team, the design team, our contractors, our engineers. I mean, we pulled probably 300 different people together from all across the country in multiple ways to help us think through these challenges and to come up with a good design and a good plan. So it's not over yet, but we got a long way to go.
That's a huge stakeholder group. 300. Oh my gosh. That's really a lot of information to manage and synthesize into a final product, right? I think that's such an interesting process to go through. It's really exciting. And it's really important to listen, right? Like that to me is like one of the superpowers of a design team, is to actually listen and take those things that are disconnected by nature because your interests are different than their interests, and taking all that and finding some way to glue it all together is such, and on a project this big, that's really, really crazy. And something you reminded me of when you were talking about it is this framework of what I used to call it start, stop, keep.
Yep.
It's like,
That's
okay, we want to start things.
Yeah.
We want to start things. Okay. But that also means we need to actually evaluate what we need to stop doing. Right. Mm-hmm. And then there's things we want to keep, we want to hang on to because they're working so well. But having those kind of very clear distinctions really helps people understand where you're going and why you're going to go there. I think that's just as a short, that's like the Cliff's Notes version of what you talked about, but it's a great framework to use, especially in this kind of discovery process of figuring out where you're going to go with a project this big.
Yeah, and we've used that. I personally used it multiple times. It's definitely a valuable adage in kind of lean thinking, lean design, process improvement, as well as, the preamble to the design process. You always want to design around the ideal as opposed to what you have. And it really, I think, helps that. I'd say one other thing that we did that is a bit unique, and there are all sorts of project delivery nowadays. There's IPD, and we use more of a collaborative project delivery that, the traditional process is very linear. So you would maybe do your strategy and then come up with how many beds and ORs, your key planning units, and you would program that and assign square footage and space, and then you would talk about how that needs to work and function, and then you would bring in and do schematic design, and then you would get into, design development, and that can take a long time to go through that. And there's value in it. When I started, we had a broad collective idea of what we wanted to do. We had a vision, not quite a full master plan, but a concept. And our goal was to get to basically a schematic design that we could present to the board, have cost certainty, or at least fairly good cost certainty around it, and do that in about 100 days. And it was super fast. We just took that front end and condensed it. And we had our construction team at the table with our designers, with our engineers. And we had regular workshops where everyone was brought together and broken up into component teams where we were targeting a specific challenge and trying to be as efficient as we could, but also hit certain cost and budget numbers. And early on. I don't know if he made too many friends, but it was a very good process, a good outcome. And being one who's gone through it enough, I've always said, like, always want to make sure I do it this way. And then we just came and smashed it together. And I think it's a really good product. I think we got something that we might not have got at the end because we brought everyone together to share and exchange ideas and challenge each other, and did it early on.
So would you put this under kind of the innovation, something that Henry Ford is really innovating on? Because I've heard of IPD, integrated project delivery, but I haven't heard of collaborative project delivery, but it sounds like you orchestrated that. And so the client as an architect orchestrating this CPD process sounds like it's your building ultimately in the end, right? And you are going to be responsible for that. You're responsible for the experience of all the clients who come through your doors. And so it makes total sense for you to own that process. Is that how you would talk about it?
Yeah, I think, first of all, one of the things that we realized is that this is a once in a lifetime or once in a generation kind of project. And I'm fortunate enough that I've got to do it in a lot of different places, but they're not all the same. And one of the things that was really specific about this was that we wanted to bring in team members that had done it before, and not just kind of did something like it somewhere, but had done over 1 million square feet, had done multiple collective projects that require multiple partnerships and multiple complex iterations and schedules. And so we had an owner's rep that really was integral in driving the CPD process. And, we had partners that were willing to do that. That means that part of that, there's an incentive for our design team, which is multiple firms, and our construction team, which is multiple organizations, and engineering team and our owner's rep all have to agree on certain principles and get evaluated based on delivery and schedule and how well they're meeting the goals of the organization. And that was a process that we probably wouldn't have been able to do as well without our owner's rep, who had kind of lived in that industry. And honestly, a little bit different than where I've seen done elsewhere, where you don't put all the risk on one party or another, but it really is this owned shared risk and process. Beyond that, though, I mean, there's just a lot of innovation. You bring up innovation in general. Henry Ford is a culture of innovation. Henry Ford himself, I think everyone knows the innovations he's brought to the assembly line and that. But this was a hospital that he built in 1915 for his workers. And at the time, may not have seemed innovative, but when everyone else was doing open wards, he was doing private and semi-private rooms. Understanding the dignity of privacy in the healing process for patients was super important. And there were not people doing that. And I think as one of the first in the country, it's important to recognize that, we're holding true to those original sentiments. Likewise, it was one of the first closed medical staffs and employed medical group. He consulted members from Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Brothers in Rochester to help. How do we do this and create an environment that's a different type of both clinical delivery, but when you look at research and education, it changes the nature of some of those activities. And so it's been a long history of those innovations. And I think, we're doing things in this development, and granted, we're a big system and we're talking mostly about Detroit, but we're doing things in this hospital that I don't think in my 20 plus years doing this that I've done anywhere at one place before. And that's pretty exciting. Some of it, time allows you to do that, but things that technologies and care models and different ways of organizing services, all things coming together in ways that I've never seen anywhere else before.
Yeah, that's like a significant amount of innovation, and it seems like it would have to be cultural for that to even be considered, because you mentioned in the CPD process, you didn't make a lot of friends early on in that process. And I think that's just indicative of professions and large organizations where it's like, well, we're comfortable doing things the way we've always done them. And if you have a culture of innovation and you're constantly pushing, you're getting people out of their comfort zone, and they're naturally going to have some opposition to that.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering if you could kind of talk through that piece of it, because like you said, you didn't have friends early, but it sounds like things shifted over time, and obviously you're delivering a state of the art project that is looking into the future, not just simply at addressing what's going on right now, right? You're building something that has to last, but it also has to be flexible, and it has to be adaptable to new technologies and new ways of providing healthcare and things like that. So what was that kind of I don't want to say behavioral shift, like more of a mindset shift through that process with the stakeholders in that process?
There are a couple of ways that I've seen that manifested, and there's some I think really powerful reasons behind it. But one of the things, first of all, I think just at the behavior of we as humans is when you're part of that solution, you definitely get the buy-in as opposed to someone saying, "Here's the solution," right? So we had immersive design events where we brought everyone in, and not just the clinicians that are providing the care or the people that are moving the materials, but put them all in the room together to talk about how things are supposed to work. And they had game pieces and they're moving things around. And there were a couple heated conversations that, like, well, I want to do it this way. And it was like, well, why do you want to do it that way? That's the way we've always done it. And you could hear some of these, specifically some of these surgeons and their personalities coming out that that listening part,
the resistance.
You want them to get that kind of storming going before you can get to that norming stage. And so, we're going from an environment where our physical structures somehow, they limit the types of interactions and the collaborative nature you can have. If everyone has their own space and it's defined as their own discrete square footage in rooms, then the ability to really think outside of that is limited. We're going to a multi-story integrated procedural platform that brings all of surgical services, interventional cardiology, radiology, vascular services into these platforms that have shared prep and recovery, that are just the next door from each other in rooms that are built to take just about any case and any sort of patient type. That's something we can't do exactly that same way today. And what that means is that as technology changes and as care protocols changes, and as you go from, say, open cases where, we used to have open heart surgery, and now you can do minimally invasive surgery to address the same kind of thing. The physical environment should be removed as a barrier, and that's just been my goal. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a skilled surgeon, but I don't want to have rooms that are too small or an environment that creates a silo of information that you can't share what this group is learning or doing with the other group. And so we've just kind of carried that all the way through the house. We've created standard inpatient floor designs based on a critical care layout and requirements from our FGI guidelines. So every room is critical care capable, knowing that patients are still getting older, and the older they live, the more comorbidities and the more diseases that they're managing, and more you see the patients in our critical care environments going up and staying longer. And those that are less acute and are issues that maybe you could be treated in an outpatient setting, those patients aren't coming to the hospital as much, or are coming and then leaving and going home the same day. And so what we had in hospitals 20 some years ago, where we had tons and tons of beds and diagnostics and all of these things that are happening, and patients are staying, a huge variation between 1 or 2 days and 30, 40 days. We still have that, but you're taking care of patients in a very different way, and you have to provide this highly critical care, complex environment for them to be cared for. And at the same time, get all the ambulatory care as close to home as you can. So we're trying to do all those things at once. And Destination Grant is really our effort at that tertiary, quaternary, high complexity volume to take care of those transplants and those robotic cases and those things that people come from all over the nation, in some cases all over the world for. But we're also a community hospital, so we have to take care of everything,
I love what you said about how decisions can't be made in a silo. And I imagine that bringing all these people in, presents many challenges with all the different ideas and with all the different opinions because everyone's doing something different. But down the line, these challenges are going to present an opportunity for those challenges to go away, right? All of these decisions that are difficult now are making for better opportunities down the line. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at with how Henry Ford is really staying ahead and creating these spaces that are so innovative.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that's changed in the last 5 years for certain is, I think, the focus on staff wellness and that ability for staff to find moments of respite. We've spent, and I've spent in my career, a lot of time focusing on the patient, and in many cases, everything else followed. And I think that was good at the time. But we've tried to take a lot of very measured steps towards how do we make sure our staff feel safe, they feel secure, that they feel like they have the opportunity to step outside of the care interaction and take a moment. And so we've invested, a lot of energy and a lot of space into that. So for example, we have respite rooms throughout the entire building on every floor. And a respite room for us is a small, quiet space that may have a sensory experience around sound and visual and lighting that enable a staff member who maybe just needs a moment, or maybe one that just had a very depressing or tough exchange with a patient or a family member, that they can go and collect themselves and spend 10, 15 minutes so that they can get through the rest of their shift, right? Instead of going in the stairwell and crying or something like that. There are some really serious things that we have to deal with.
Sure.
So we invest in those. We invest in wellness rooms for nursing mothers. We invest in daylight. All of our spaces for staff, as much as possible, are with access to daylight and views. And so while that's a requirement for our guidelines for patients to have access to light on an inpatient basis, we want those team rooms to be in a setting where they can just see the light of day, right? And they can understand the circadian rhythms that go along with that, and the mental acuity that develops from just having an awareness of your surroundings. And so we've been trying to do a lot of things just to think about the whole person, whether you're a staff member or a patient. How do we help acknowledge that you come in with more than a treatable illness or more than a health question, that you come in with kids and family members and arguments, and you're running late and your phone didn't charge right? I mean, we're all human beings that enter this space. And so we really have to think about the amenities and the other aspects that involve with our mental health and acuity, as well as the physical components.
Yeah, something I used to think about a lot as a design architect was, my client is the organization, but the actual client is your client,
yeah,
right? And it's also your staff. And so they're the ones having the day-to-day operational, like it's taxing physically, it's taxing mentally, emotionally. The nervous system is constantly taking hits. You need especially with long shifts like there are in the healthcare industry, you need to be able to have those downtimes, those reset moments to be able to do that. And I'm just curious what it's like working with that design team, because going back to that 1915 hospital, I'm sure it was designed absolutely nothing like what you're doing now with Destination Grand, right? It's kind of like that, probably the inverse. It's like, I'm sure it's like a maze with rooms with no windows, and I haven't been there, but I've been to hospitals like that, right? And so I can only imagine what it's actually like compared to what you're doing now. And so working with those design teams through that process, I mean, I'm sure they're bringing innovative ideas to you, as well as you pushing for innovative ideas from within your own organization and knowing your organization so well. But I would imagine there's some excitement around developing these kinds of things on a project of this scale.
Yeah, and our design team probably has done more big complex projects like this than anyone, and was a big reason for this, and had done a lot of groundbreaking effort. So they definitely brought things to the table. A couple of things that I think were really important for us that set the foundation. We've probably all heard about the Disney concept, the onstage and the offstage aspect of onstage is where your visitors and your public and your patients are, and the offstage is the behind the scenes patient care, but also moving, supplies and trash and all that stuff that nobody wants to see, right? So it's pretty hard to do that in our old facility where you have one corridor going down the middle and patient rooms on either side. And whether you're headed through the building to go to a meeting, or you're transporting trash, or you're transporting a patient, or you're just a nurse dodging around to get from one room to another, that's a lot. And yet we still manage to do a great job in that environment. But we've created multiple ways of onstage and offstage so that we have specific elevator banks that are totally separate and you would not even be able to access if you're not, a staff member, a part of the care team. We've created a whole second level continuum of bridges. We're across West Grand Boulevard. This is our current hospital is north of West Grand. The new development is south. So we're bridging what is 6 lanes of traffic, literally bridging it and creating an onstage and offstage environment, but a second floor continuum that is secured, it is conditioned, it is we're getting the right things in the right environment so that it helps with our wayfinding. So we're doing that all the way up and down the units, so in every clinical environment. So that piece of it, I think, is a big part of how we start to lay out the foundations of building to building and connecting staff and literally connecting some of those physical silos in a way that we bring them together. We've introduced and we are introducing autonomous mobile robots. So we have AMRs that will be moving everything from pharmaceuticals to lab specimens to clean supplies and linen, and taking it from a whole building that was designed as a logistics hub, connected via 2 bridges to the rest of our hospital, and moving supplies and equipment around and doing it in a way that, number one, staff and patients don't need to see it, but also, showing the efficiency that we can create by not having trash out in the open. We have a pneumatic trash system that will vacuum sucks the trash both horizontally and vertically and takes it and puts it in the dumpster. I mean, there are things that why should we have trash in our hallways? It's hard enough to control infection. It's hard enough to create an environment that people, are trying to sleep in a hospital and hearing the cars running up and down the hallways. So all of those little things, from bringing quiet, bringing less congestion and noise, and trying to create a greater sense of calm, are the result of some of these pretty big ideas of how do we change the way that we move around the campus, or what are the technologies we can employ.
Just a passing comment. I love that you reference Disney is like an inspirational aspect to this, right? Because it's a really keen observation, right? It's like that's the Disney magic about visiting a theme park, is this separation of front of house and back of house. And it's like cast members just appear where they need to appear, and we don't have to see the trash, and it just creates for a better experience for everybody, right? You mentioned the staff and the patients, and I think that is such an interesting thing, and I just love that that's happening in this industry, is that we're looking outside at the way other organizations are operating and creating really amazing client experiences, and then applying that to a completely different industry in interesting ways. I think that's really cool. You mentioned trash, this really innovative trash system and robots. And I'm curious from a sustainability standpoint. I know these projects are huge, consumers of power, natural gas, things like that. And so I'm curious about kind of where you stand with this new project as a $2.2 billion, 1.5 million square foot project in an urban environment, right? So this is going to be a big hit on the local infrastructure. So how do you approach sustainability in a project of this size?
In some cases, we're lucky that it's so big, because it's hard to make big impacts without investing a ton of money to do it. We knew that we were going to be facing some serious challenges from an energy standpoint. Our CEO went to Washington and signed the pledge that a lot of other organizations did, another dozen or so at the time, to be carbon neutral by 2050 for our system. We were also a smaller system at that point, so we've inherited some other challenges with that.
Right.
But as part of that process, we have determined we are creating a new central energy hub that should be the first of its kind in the Midwest and probably the second in the United States to have us be an all-electric hospital by 2030. That's a pretty big thing. There's another electric hospital, which is in California, has very different climate challenges than we do in Michigan with freezing temperatures and hot summer temperatures. But that's a big part of getting us onto clean energy. We also are going to be reducing our landfill waste, and there's a huge effort around composting, using biodigesters, increasing recycling, and not just doing it for us, but also looking at how we can leverage those for the community. These big biodigesters can take in tons and tons of biome and convert it into usable fertilizer. And we have some pocket farms that are emerging in Detroit and communities that are investing in small farms and things like that. And those are all kind of, I don't know, maybe they're not obvious, but they're kind of like, wow, that's big. But then we have, we're using things like triple pane glass that is more energy efficient and helps to keep the temperatures more streamlined in our building. We have a lot of green space that we're using. We have a park in between our existing and our new hospital that would be the biggest park within a 20-minute walk. And we are using native plantings and natural environments to increase water detention and water management so that there's a lot of flooding that happens in Detroit, we just overload the infrastructure. So looking at those green spaces, looking at different ways that we can use carbon fixing supplies and materials in our building process. There's just a lot of aspects of sustainability that I think that we're just getting started. We're adding several more EV charging stations for electric vehicles. We're looking at replacing much of our fleet with EV vehicles, looking at partnerships with local businesses. We're one of the founding partners of Michigan Central, which is in partnership with Ford Motor and other taking on mobility challenges and sustainability challenges, and just taking all of that automotive ingenuity and skill sets and engineering prowess and converting that to things that are really relevant for us today. And we're just starting to see a lot of those come to bear in the new project.
That sounds amazing, because that pledge is not easy, especially with a project of this size. But to your point, it's hard to do it unless you have a project that you can actually do it with. And it sounds like that's just a shared goal among the whole organization, because top down is saying we're going to meet that pledge. That's really cool.
And I think it goes to the community piece. I mean, I think that's one thing we haven't talked a little bit about, but we are one of just a couple hospitals left in Detroit. A lot of hospitals have left Detroit in the last several decades. And so we made a commitment that we did want to be part of the community, that we wanted to stay in Detroit, that we wanted to stay in the New Center area. And as our destination grant is part of our Future of Health project, which includes a research building across the lodge in partnership with Michigan State. It includes some residential development with the Pistons. And we are, taking a broad swath of everything from Rosa Parks Boulevard and Motown Museum over towards Woodward, and connecting it all together in a way that it's an economic driver for the entire community. And we've already started to see significant investment come in from developers who are taking old buildings that have been abandoned and converting them into apartments. and making sure that there are apartments available for low income, as well as for some of our transportation challenged staff members who want to live, work, and play in the same environment. We have restaurants, we have grocery stores and convenience stores. We're in a little bit of a desert in some of those remarks about how easy access to healthy food, daycare centers. So we're here, to attract research and talent and be able to perform these most complex types of procedures and care in the community. And our community members are doubling down and bringing investment to the area, and just seeing, this whole change that I think is refreshing for folks, that we don't, there's a lot that's happened in Detroit, a lot that's happened in Detroit in itself, and the redevelopment and with the sports teams and other, large organizations coming into downtown. But we're, just on that ring, just outside of it. And really, it's just the tip of the iceberg here. We got, 4.5 years to go. And we're already seeing a big change from putting some steel in the ground. So I guess we're going to keep going.
They're so cool. Like, honestly, we want to see a lot of change in Detroit. And oftentimes there's a bad connotation with like these large cities. And when we can make those changes, and it's going to be over time, like you said, it's going to be over 4.5 years. But all of this collaboration from different developers and getting people involved is really going to help to navigate that. And so you can say you are the change, be the change is what everyone always says. And this is really driving that.
Yeah, it's fun to be part. And I don't know that I've been a part of some net new hospital developments in the desert in the Middle East, for example. You're creating a city around that. Been part of some, other parts of, whether you're outside of St. Louis or parts of Chicago, where you're in an area that is economically challenged and you're impacting it. I don't think I've seen anything quite like this before anywhere, in the United States or abroad. And the excitement that's happening, the people that are stepping up, and other organizations that want to be a part of it. We get calls every week that someone wants to, think about a partnership or think about how can we do something a little bit different. And I say all the time, I don't know what business as usual is yet, because every time I think, okay, we got this, and now we're just going to execute, then someone says, but what about this? Can we do this? And
what if?
Yeah. What if we didn't do it that way and we tried something totally different? But I just put a plan together that said we're going to do it this way. But it keeps it interesting. Yeah.
I'm interested to hear about all these collaborations that are happening in this community building aspect you guys are obviously showing a lot of leadership in this regard, and then people look at that and they see that as, oh, that's like permission for us to try something too. And like by you doing it, you're basically proving that it's possible and showing other people that it might be possible for them as well. And one of my favorite kind of project related concepts is that the project does not stop at the property line. And a lot of projects are set up that way, where it's like, okay, here's our property line. This is our outer boundary. We won't go past it. We don't need to think about what happens beyond that. Especially in urban environments, though, that's never the case. Like you have to integrate with the urban fabric. You have to integrate with transportation, infrastructure, your neighbors, all these things. And so the project really lives far beyond the property line. And you're talking about an electric vehicle fleet that's going to obviously go out and do things and bring, transport and people and goods and all of these things. And so you really are integrating with that fabric and really going beyond the property line and having these collaborations with other organizations. That's really cool to hear about. So kudos to you and your team for thinking big. I mean, that's really, this is one of those things where it's like what if is a great question, because you can think really big. You can always dial it back. But if you don't think big, you'll never get there, right? So it's really kind of it's inspiring to hear.
Well, thank you. It's inspiring for me every day, and there are so many people in our organization that have deep roots in Michigan and Detroit, and have strong connections with other organizations that are doing wonderful things. And so we get to bring some of those to bear. We're looking at, different ways of art installation, different ways of education, and bringing, young adults and children into the process and teaching them what it is to be either a clinician or a lab tech, and so we have kind of this, used to be called Henry Ford University, but like thinking of like what is that next generation. And then we have opportunities where we want to bring small businesses in, and our staff want to experience some of their favorite neighborhood amenities. And so we're just now having that conversation. How do we bring in the right cafe and coffee shop, or how do we make sure we partner with some of these local smaller vendors that either come in and do
Nice.
whether it's food trucks or fairs, or take advantage of our green space and take advantage of all the people we have coming and going every day. And I think it's a fine line that you walk between how do you become how do you be that focal point for when everything goes wrong. The hospital's there to help you, and also be a place where people can gather and exchange ideas and feel safe and comfortable, and there's some sort of economic engine that goes along with it. It's really hard to curate that, and I don't know anyone that's really done that well where I've seen it. And some of it is where the hospitals are situated. Some of it is the neighborhoods and the surrounding. But we have such a great group of community members and neighbors. They've been engaged throughout our process. We have a community benefits ordinance that requires us to engage them throughout this, and have brought ideas to the table, have challenged us to do some things which have a positive impact. And so we're just excited about keeping it going. Like I say, we got 4 more years, and I'm sure by the time we open, we'll be talking about more new exciting things.
It'll be a little different than what you've foreseen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think about this idea of building a community so that you're building relationships with the community so that when something happens, they trust you. I mean, that to me is so much better than the transactional healthcare system that many people deal with, right? It's like, oh, all of a sudden I need this thing, may or may not be an emergency, but I need to go do this thing, and then I'm back out and I'm not going to deal with it until I have to again. And what you're talking about is something completely different. It's like events and coordination with local businesses and bringing people in to build a relationship over time so that you're their trusted partner when it comes to needing healthcare. I think we're seeing that more and more with businesses that are really taking what they're doing seriously. But that community aspect is difficult to do, but it is so essential to that long-term viability of the business. I think that so that you're not just a transactional kind of a relationship with people.
And it goes to, I think, what you mentioned earlier was the idea of healthcare or wellness. It goes beyond the bounds of the campus or the building. And so technology is a big part of that. How do we create, I have 3 children, and I know that all the social media things in their hands, or they're constantly engaging in many different ways that is not the way that maybe we did growing up. So how do we make sure that we provide ways for all of our customers to access us? And that's part of that's the built infrastructure that's creating the 500 sites of care and making sure that we're bringing care as close to home as possible. But it's also digital. It's also outreach in the schools. It's also, partnering with local businesses. So I think, we're a big organization. We take what we do pretty seriously, and with 50,000 people, we know that we can't be just singularly focused on one thing. That we have to create this organic community that lives all across Southeast Michigan. And I think Destination Grant and the work we're doing with the Future of Health and MSU is a springboard that we're very fortunate to have. I mean, not too many organizations can spend $3 billion and coming out of some of the situation that we in Detroit have been in. But I think the payoff will be much greater than that.
Great investment. Great story. I just wanted to invite you to share if there's anything left that you think our audience needs to know about that maybe isn't getting enough attention on this project. I mean, a lot of the audience is hearing about it, I'm sure, for the first time. But is there anything else that you feel like really should be a point to make during this conversation to them?
Good question. There's a lot we haven't mentioned, at least in this conversation. I think for me, one of the things that I get excited about is thinking about the connectivity that comes out of this investment. So I'm thinking of a smart patient room where a patient is lying in the bed and has a large screen at the foot wall and can interact with it. We're calling it Hey Henry, but like turn down the lights, open the shades, call my mother, and next thing you know, you have a doctor coming in the room and her face is showing up on the screen and it tells you who she is and her specialty, and they want to bring up diagnostics and they say, well, let's bring in your mother and they'll round in a virtual setting, and all of a sudden, instead of this patient being alone in their room, they feel like they're part of something bigger and larger. And a lot of that has to do with our great care teams and the support teams we have. But we wouldn't be able to do that, and it would be significantly harder and probably more expensive to do that in our existing environments. And it's those types of things that we don't even really know the impact of yet. We can't fully, I mean, it's the AI conversation, like, well, what does that really do and mean? I don't know. Does that mean that the patients can go home earlier, that they heal faster? Does it mean that they feel, less alone, that whatever it is, there's a lot of those things that I think would put there's a lot of skepticism, I guess, around some of the new technologies out there. And I think there's a lot of positivity that will come from it. And happy to talk more about it if anybody is interested. All the things that we're doing on security and doing around logistics, I think is going to make this feel like a very different kind of place. Not quite like the Jetsons, but there's some Jetson-like things that are happening that are kind of cool. So
you got robots. You got Rosie.
You got robots and pneumatic tubes and chutes and all these things. And yeah, it's kind of fun.
What sounds really cool about what you were just talking about is like this level of agency that I think a lot of people don't get when they go to a hospital room, right? It's like everything is unintuitive, or maybe it's locked away in a cabinet. But for me to just using my voice, say, turn the lights on, roll down the shades, call my mother, whatever those things are, it just gives the patient some agency to have a little control over that environment. Obviously, you have to strike the right balance there, but just that right there sounds so simple, and yet it sounds so much better than I think the typical situations. And it's really cool to hear that you guys are thinking through all of those. It reminds me of one of my favorite marketing campaigns of all time, which was Think Different. Like that was Apple, right? In the 80s, Think Different. And that to me is what you guys are doing. You're taking a known quantity, a known system, and you're just pushing and pushing and pushing and saying, what if? And to me, I mean, that is innovation. And you're intentionally investing in innovating in your organization. And that sounds like, I'm really glad that we got to highlight that today. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you. If we're exchanging quotes, one of my favorites is from Winston Churchill. And the House of Commons burned down at one point, and he wanted to recreate it in its original grandeur. And he made a statement about, first we shape our buildings, and thereafter they shape us. And that's a lot about why I do what I do. The impact that just that physical environment can have carries on for generations. So it's exciting to be a part of it.
And such an important perspective. I love that.
Absolutely. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us. We'll put links to everything that we talked about, including several articles, links to the website, the project, Destination Grand, in the show notes for this episode. again, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Candace. Nice to talk to you.